In July 2022, when Timothy Ferguson was just 15 years old, he died of starvation and torture at the hands of his own mother and his older brother. When the truth about the long ordeal Timothy was subjected to was released, law enforcement, judges, and the general public branded Paul Ferguson and Shanda Vander Ark as pure psychopaths. 13 years prior, Timothy had been removed from Shanda's custody between 2009 and 2012 after there were allegations that the boy, who was autistic, was being abused. He and his siblings were given to his father, Eric, to be cared for. However, somehow, at some point, they were returned to Shanda's care. It would ultimately prove to be a fatal decision for Timothy. To this day, it is uncertain why Shanda's parental rights were not terminated and exactly how she managed to get her children back into her custody, but it's believed Eric claimed he was unable to continue to care for Timothy, and so he was given up to Shanda. Shanda subjected her son to months of unthinkable abuse before his death. Timothy, who had some mental disabilities and was being homeschooled, was routinely subjected to a litany of tortures, including being fed hot sauce, restrained with shackles and zip ties, and deprived of sleep. The extent of the abuse was truly staggering, with reports indicating that Vander Ark even instructed her older son, 20-year-old Paul Ferguson, to taunt his younger brother with frozen pizza rolls and to pour hot sauce on his siblings' genitals. The pair even exchanged text messages in which Shanda questioned whether or not it was a suitable enough punishment and various ways in which Paul should further punish Timothy. The abuse reached its horrifying climax on July 6, 2022, when Timothy was found dead in the glorified closet that his mother forced him to sleep in, wrapped only in a tarp. Shanda said she had found Timothy unresponsive and called 911, but first responders soon realized something sinister had taken place. The teenager, who weighed just 69 pounds at the time of his death, had suffered from malnourishment and hypothermia after enduring months of cruel mistreatment at the hands of his mother and older brother. He was so malnourished that first responders thought he was as young as 8 years old. The police were called and Shanda was interviewed. She claimed that Timothy had fallen out of a bunk bed, and that was why he was unresponsive, but medical examiners later ruled his death as a homicide. The details of Timothy's final hours are particularly disturbing, with Paul Ferguson testifying that he left his brother in a freezing tub for 4 hours just before the boy's death, allegedly at the instruction of Vander Ark. Surveillance cameras positioned within the family home by Shanda to monitor all of Timothy's movements would later capture her dragging Timothy to his closet and calling him pathetic. Timothy wasn't moving, and his breathing was shallow as he gasped for air. Shanda then covered his mouth with her hand and yelled at him that he didn't need to breathe like that. Moments later, Timothy's chest stopped rising and he passed away, his eyes still open. It took 18 minutes for Shanda to call 911. When Paul was questioned, he told officers that Timothy was on a hunger strike, but later changed his story and confessed that his mother had told him to lie. But soon, a twisted web of culpability between the two would emerge. 2 days later, after investigators pieced together the horrific series of events, Shanda Vander Ark was arrested and charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree child abuse. Paul was arrested a few days after his mother. As the case unfolded in court, the extent of Vander Ark's cruelty and lack of remorse became increasingly apparent. The sight of Timothy's lifeless body, with bruises and his ribs nearly visible through his skin, was so distressing that it sent Vander Ark into a vomiting fit during her final testimony on the stand. Paul was the prosecution's key witness, and he described how his mother locked the refrigerator and pantry doors, and the pair forced Timothy to run up and down stairs as part of his punishment. He was also forced to kneel in his closet with his hands above his head, maintaining the position for several hours, which would be monitored by Paul and Shanda. His bathroom trips were also timed, and if he was late or had an accident, he would be punished. Judge Matthew Casel, who presided over the trial, struggled to comprehend how a mother could inflict such horrors upon her own child, stating, "I've been trying now for this entire case to wrap my mind around how somebody could do something so horrific, not only to another human being, but to their own child. You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. Let's call it what it is. It's torture." Vander Ark was ultimately found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse, with Judge Casel sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a powerful statement, Casel refused to display the distressing images of Timothy's body, instead choosing to remember the boy as he was in a smiling photograph. "I'm choosing to remember him like that, and you can't even look at him," Casel said, addressing Vander Ark. "That's how he was, a beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was, and you took that from him." The case has also brought attention to the role of Paul Ferguson, Vander Ark's older son, who played a significant part in the abuse that led to Timothy's death. Ferguson pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse in December, admitting to his involvement in the horrific mistreatment of his younger brother. While Ferguson claimed to have been operating under his mother's instruction, his actions have been met with widespread condemnation and disgust. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison for his role, with credit for the 592 days already spent in jail. As the community grapples with the aftermath of this unthinkable tragedy, many are left wondering how such abuse could have gone unnoticed for so long. The fact that Timothy was being homeschooled likely contributed to the lack of outside intervention, as he was not regularly interacting with teachers or other adults who may have noticed signs of abuse. Additionally, the involvement of Paul Ferguson in the mistreatment of his younger brother raises questions about the family dynamics and the role of enablers in cases of extreme child abuse. The case of Shanda Vander Ark and the death of Timothy Ferguson serve as a heartbreaking reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable children from abuse and neglect. As the legal proceedings conclude and Vander Ark begins her life sentence behind bars, the community is left to mourn the loss of a young boy whose life was cut tragically short by the very people who should have been his greatest protectors. The case has also sparked a broader conversation about the need for increased awareness and intervention in cases of child abuse, particularly when the abuse is occurring within the home. Many are calling for stronger safeguards to be put in place to identify and protect children who may be suffering in silence, hidden away from the outside world. Shanda Vander Ark is now seeking to appeal her convictions and regain custody of her youngest child. The very notion that a woman capable of such unimaginable cruelty could even entertain the idea of being allowed near another child is both bewildering and deeply disturbing. The move has been met with widespread outrage and disbelief from a community still reeling from the horrific details of Timothy's torture and death. It is difficult to fathom the depths of depravity that would drive a mother to subject her own child to such heinous abuse, and even harder to comprehend the audacity of seeking to regain custody of another child after committing such unspeakable acts. The very notion flies in the face of every basic instinct of parental love and protection, and serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can reside within the human heart. As the legal battle over Vander Ark's appeals begins to unfold, one can only hope that the courts will see through any attempts to manipulate the system and will prioritize the safety and well-being of her surviving child above all else. At the same time, the case raises broader questions about our society's approach to protecting vulnerable children from abuse and neglect. How can we ensure that the warning signs of such horrific mistreatment are recognized and acted upon before it is too late? How can we provide better support and resources for families who may be struggling, while also holding those who commit such atrocities fully accountable for their actions? In the end, the case of Shanda Vander Ark and the tragic death of Timothy Ferguson will forever serve as a devastating reminder of the unimaginable cruelty that can exist within the walls of a family home.